Let's go to it. Call the meeting to order of the Wilmington City Council on this agenda briefing meeting. Do have to do a roll call. Mayor Pro Tem, you here? Here. Ms. Reinbart? Ms. Anderson? Mr. Barnett? Here. Mr. Spears?
Here.
Mr. Waddell? And of course, chair's here. Okay, we have several recognitions tomorrow evening. C1 is approval of the minutes. C2 is a resolution officially accepting public street and storm drainage facilities within the Nutt Street right-of-way. C3 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with Dorian Precision Systems Incorporated for the purchase of an add-on component to the driving simulator system in the amount of $109,950 for the Haynes Lacewell Police and Fire Training Facility. C4 is a resolution requesting the city clerk to investigate the sufficiency of a petition for annexation. C5 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement to purchase 55 sets of firefighting coats and pants from NAVCO of Decatur, Alabama for $167,713 through the NPP Government Cooperative Buying Agreement. C6 is a resolution authorizing the Downtown Business Alliance to utilize Chestnut Street between North 3rd Street and North 2nd Street for the service of alcoholic beverage during their Downtown Alive concert series. C7 is a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter an agreement with the TransPro Consulting LLC for the facilitation of the City of Wilmington's 4 to 5 year strategic plan. PH1 is an ordinance directing the housing inspector to vacate, close, and repair or demolish a dwelling at 910 Campbell Street as unfit for human habitation pursuant to Article 5, Chapter 16 of the City Code, and directing that a notice be placed thereon prohibiting its use or occupancy. PH2 is an ordinance directing the housing inspector to vacate, close, and repair the dwelling at 815 South 13th Street as unfit for human habitation pursuant to Article 5, Chapter 16 of the City Code, and directing that a notice be placed thereon prohibiting its use or occupancy. Yes, sir.
Is the fact that the second one doesn't use the word demolish mean that that's not on the table? Silly question, I'm just curious.
Yeah, so the difference between repair and demolish and repair is the estimated cost to repair versus the tax value of the structure. So with 910 Campbell Street, for example, our cost to repair is above 50%. However, with 815 South 13th Street, the tax value of that structure is pretty high, so we don't meet the 50% threshold. So that's why we're at repair. Technically, we could demolish that for an abandonment of intent to repair, but we would come back to council before we take that action.
Thank you, Brian.
You're welcome.
Ordinances 01A is a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into a municipal agreement with NCDOT for the 17th Street multi-use path between Harbor Drive and Shipyard Boulevard. And then 01B is the ordinance making the supplemental appropriation in the amount of $734,000 from the North Carolina Department of Transportation to the Streets and Sidewalks Capital Project Fund for the 17th Street multi-use path between Harbor Drive and Shipyard Boulevard. 02A is an ordinance making supplemental appropriations of $11,226,625 to the general fund for the purchase of 115 North 3rd Street and 210 Chestnut Street, and to provide the related fiscal year 2022 operating cost. And then 02B is a resolution authorizing up to $11,025,000 purchase of real property for office space. Okay, 03A is a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with the North Carolina Department of Transportation for an interlocal agreement with New Hanover County for the Wilmington Multimodal Transportation Center, Phase 1B project. And then 03B is an ordinance making the supplemental appropriations in the amount of $1,873,469 from the North Carolina Department of Transportation, $165,793 from New Hanover County, and $165,793 from the general fund for the Wilmington Multimodal Transportation Center Phase 1B project. Then 03C is a resolution authorizing the award of a construction contract in the amount of $3,144,446 to Paragon Building Corporation for the Wilmington Multimodal Transportation Center Phase 1B project. And then 04A is a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into an interlocal agreement with Cape Fear Public Utility Authority for College Acres Drive and Clear Run Branch Drainage Improvements Project in the amount of $780,000. 04B is the ordinance appropriating $783,000 from the Cape Fear Public Utility Authority to support utility conflict engineering, design services, and utility relocation construction costs for the College Acres Drive drainage improvements and Clear Run Branch drainage improvements and stream restoration project, an approved capital improvement project and a priority of the City Council. Then 04C is a resolution awarding a contract to East Coast Contracting Incorporated of Wilmington, North Carolina, in the amount of $7,717,120.36 for the Clear Run Branch and College Acres Drive drainage improvements and stream restoration project. Resolutions R1A is a resolution authorizing the city manager to apply for a Golden Leaf Foundation grant for the College Acres Drive and Clear Run Branch drainage improvement project Phase 1 in the amount of $250,000. And then item R1B is the resolution authorizing the city manager to apply for a grant in the amount of $250,000 from the Golden Leaf Foundation to enhance construction funds for the Pirates Cove drainage improvements. And then RP1 will be Council's Appointments Committee for Boards and Commissions, and Councilmember Rivenbark will be giving a report from that. That concludes this portion of the agenda. Are there any items brought forward by our city manager?
Mr. Mayor, we have two items this morning for your consideration. The first is a recommendation from the Clean Energy Subcommittee on participation in the Soul Smart program. David will be presenting that item for us.
Very good. Yeah.
This is not a sympathy vote because of his arm or anything. I'm just asking.
We had to strong arm him to get him up there this morning.
Y'all did it. Let's see if I can. I go back. Oh, no, that's fine, thanks. If you wouldn't mind advancing back. Let's see. Here we go. Good morning, Mayor, City Council. Just wanted to bring you all abreast of some of the programs that we've been working on in regard to the Clean Energy Advisory Committee. The Soul Smart program is a nationally recognized program. It's funded through the Department of Energy. That's provided by a grant by the Solar Foundation. The program actually looks at helping to reduce the soft cost of implementing solar projects, both residential and commercial size solar projects in the community. It does that by really streamlining both the planning, the permitting and inspection process, as well as looking at any planning and zoning ordinances the city may have in regards to solar programs. We were provided technical assistance for this program through the North Carolina Clean Tech Center. They were instrumental in helping us navigate the program at no cost. This was an opportunity that provided both the city staff as well as the county staff to collaborate on this project, as the county staff handles the permitting and inspection portions and aligning those areas, and then our city planning and zoning staff helped with some of the other areas. The program looks at designating communities either bronze, silver, or gold depending on the programs that you have in place. And it's been completed by over 400 communities in 41 states across the country, and including 15 here in North Carolina. And there's actually going to be some additional communities here in North Carolina that have just recently achieved designation as well. Just some of the benefits. A recent study by the Academy of Sciences saw that participation in the program actually helps increase solar capacity in the community by about 18 to 19% per month, as well as the impact of jobs and economic development by including solar companies to set up and provide jobs in the area. again, yeah, solar companies helping to reduce the red tape for implementing projects, streamlining that process encourages greater solar development in an area, as well as for our customers, residents here in the community that may want to invest in solar. It increases their return on investment by decreasing the overall cost of a project. So the current status, as you'll remember, the SolSmart program, it was actually recommended in the final report recommendations that came out of the Clean Energy Task Force about a year ago. The current Clean Energy Advisory Committee took those recommendations and acted upon it by participating in the program, as well as at our last meeting, the March 15th meeting of the Advisory Committee, they voted to go ahead and submit the information for the program and go for designation. Again, I mentioned the collaborative effort that we experienced both with the county staff as well as our city staff working on this program. I definitely would like to thank all of those groups for helping on this effort. And from that, we were able to submit documentation on March 15th, and we actually received notification on March 28th that the city received bronze designation for the SolSmart program. And just wanted to note that we didn't have to change or do anything in regard to any of our planning or zoning.
Got a question over here.
Yes.
I see no planning and zoning changes are needed to achieve the bronze designation, but we've applied for silver designation. Will there be proposed planning and zoning changes to achieve the silver?
I think it's to achieve the silver. I think there's some training both for county and city staff that we would have to go through to get to that level. We're still working on that collaborative effort with the city, but at this point, no, we don't see any planning or zoning changes.
Mr. Ravenborough?
Yes, sir.
What are the different levels of achievement that you have to go from, say, bronze to silver to gold?
Yeah, they basically give different point levels for achieving some of these additional levels. We actually have enough points to achieve a silver level right now, but there are some prerequisites that we have not achieved yet, so we'd have to, which are in regard to some best practices in regard to training programs for both the county staff as well as some of our city staff to go through. So we don't believe that's a whole very big time requirement. So we're just kind of working through some of those details, but that's something we hope we can strive for here in the next year.
So when we started this program, we were already achieving pretty much bronze status.
Yeah, we had to update some of the things on our websites, just kind of easy navigation in regard to residents or solar businesses looking to do a project. We had to kind of update and make sure those steps were easy to find and a streamlined process. Yep. Again, so where do we want to go from here with the future of SolSmart? There are, again, some additional required collaboration that we're working on. We would like to bring forth a resolution here in the next few months targeting that silver level of SolSmart, as well as this effort really aligns well with both our clean energy goals as well as our greenhouse gas reduction goals. And just some ongoing education and outreach to our citizens, as well as some of the solar businesses in the area, just letting them know that we're participating in the program, hoping to streamline the process and make it more affordable for both businesses as well as our residents to participate in solar programs. And just sorry for the very small images on here, but this is actually a mapping tool within the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association that would allow us to track progress in the area. It shows the total number of solar projects that are currently in an area, and over time, every 6 months to a year, we could check in and to see how much more capacity and solar projects are implemented in the area. So.
Yeah, we were commenting, that looks like a lot.
It does, yeah. I mean, we actually do have quite a good number here in the state. I mean,
Well, in the county?
North Carolina in general, I think, is number 4 in the country as far as installed solar capacity across the state, so.
I'm probably catching up to everybody up here, but this is just an opt-in program that we have to advocate for residents and development professionals who want to utilize solar, right?
Correct, yeah. Just a process for making things more streamlined and less costly, reducing those soft costs while solar panels and the hardware prices on that continue to come down. Communities often find that those soft costs in regard to implementing programs continue to rise or are not dropping. So we're trying to streamline and make that process more affordable.
Since you know where North Carolina ranks, do you know where Wilmington ranks within North Carolina?
We actually do. We received I don't have that info right here in front of me, but we do have that information. So, and that was probably, we got the report from, it was through the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association, people who do this map. They did a report for us in 2020, and I know I just pulled this information last week, and we've increased significantly since then. But, I would say we're in the, top 5, top 8 across the state.
Yes, sir. You keep referring, going back to the soft cost and how we're going to, take aim at that. Can you give me just a brief explanation of what kind of soft costs you're talking about? Financing, rules, regulations?
Permitting and inspection fees. I think those would be the main costs for residents as far as if they're implementing a program, making sure those costs aren't, exorbitant in any way.
Do you think they are now?
I don't believe they are now, so I think,
Did you say you don't think they are now?
I don't think that they are now, but I think, they want to make sure that they're at a level comparable to other communities across the state that are implementing the program.
So that's basically soup to nuts, permitting. How about the cost of you said the cost of the material itself was going steadily down?
Correct, yeah. Panels continue to drop in price, but it's those soft costs that often are a hindrance or affect that return on investment some.
And the length of time for permitting?
Yep, they want to make sure that process is as streamlined as possible, that there's less forms to fill out. If we can get by, or if projects can get by with just a single inspection as opposed to multiple inspections, anything to streamline that process.
Understood. Thank you, sir.
Sure.
So actually what you're saying is, now is the best time if people want to get involved in saving with solar. Now is the best time to kind of invest, not invest. What is that term, but-
I think there's possible some opportunities coming down the road, both for, federal and perhaps state incentives to, there was kind of, if you look at that graph behind you, we were kind of at one level for a number of years. In like 2008, 2009, we saw quite a big bump in solar projects across the state. That's because there were some state incentives. Those expired, and we kind of plateaued again. So we're hoping there will be some additional incentives, whether that's state or federal, that are coming down the line as well, that would make solar even more affordable. Sure.
I would just warn folks. I've had several people knocking on my door that are that make things sound really wonderful, and they are there to take you to the cleaners. So, and it's been in the paper recently as well. I saw an article. So you have to. Nobody's probably going to watch the agenda review and see me say this, but point being, do your homework. If it says Duke Power's one of our sponsors, call Duke Power. Don't just sign up. And I could see so many people getting taken advantage of just because, hey, you're going to generate electricity. You won't have an electrical bill. In fact, we're going to buy it from you. That's what they tell you. And then you end up not even covering your costs on it. So because the interest is huge and et cetera. So just
Yeah.
Dave,
agree.
to Councilman Anderson's point, I mean, I don't know if we can do it, or maybe the city attorney can address this, but if we do have people come to the community, and depending on their reputation, if they end up with one of these characters, unfortunately, and they end up, like Neil said, into Wonderland, spending money, don't really know what's happened, is there a best practice, or is it like a Better Business Bureau for solar companies that are out here? I know that there's a number here, correct?
There are, yeah. I mean, we've got one building a brand-new headquarter just down the road.
Down the street.
Yeah, I think like with any project, vendors, you got to do your homework as far as, you know, what's realistic in quality of the vendors. So, you know, I'm sure there's probably some of that kind of education outreach we could do as part of this program, and perhaps providing links to go to. Yep.
That'd be very helpful,
Yep.
extremely.
All right,
That's all
anybody else? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor, we have an update on the RFQ process for the Castle Street property. Aubrey will bring us up to date on that.
Good morning, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council. 1110 Castle Street. As evidenced by the long history associated with this property and this project, this one is not easy. It's complex. And figuring out the best course of action for this property, I think there's an awful lot to consider, and it'll be hard to sum it up quickly, but I'll do my best to spend about 10 minutes relaying to you all what I think are the key considerations that we consider as we evaluate next steps. I've had a lot of folks approach me about this property, and they all ask some form of the same question, which is, why hasn't it succeeded yet? How have we not been able to do something here? And after 4 months of looking at this project in depth, I think the the best answer that I can come up with is that the city's ambition for redevelopment, what we hope to accomplish with the redevelopment of the property, is just incompatible with the realities that are at the property, and also the realities in the way in which we have to transact business as a local unit of government, and the market as well. There's very, very, very little margin for success in that recipe. So what I'd like to do is just dive into some of the details a bit here in the slides of what the key considerations are, and I think the premise of this discussion will be to lay out what those key considerations are to you all. I'll stick to the facts as opposed to going into maybe more the aspirational side of things, what we should be trying to do with the property. I'll just review the relevant facts and provide some recommendations at the end. So there's really 4 primary property considerations that I'd ask you all to keep in mind as we go through the presentation here. The first and foremost are environmental issues, and I'll get into those more in a bit, but basically the eastern half of the property where the bus maintenance activities took place have some soil contamination issues, soil gas issues, and potentially some other issues that will need to be resolved as well. Then on top of that, quite literally, you have these structures, and the condition of these structures has really deteriorated over the last couple of years, and I'll show you all some pictures on exactly what we're talking about there. Then layered on top of those 2 issues are legal constraints, and that goes back to more in the way in which we have to transact business as a local unit of government. The legal constraints as to how we organize a deal can be very, very difficult to administer, depending on what the proposal is, and we can dive into more about that here in a moment as well. And then this last one I'm calling private sector compatibility, but really this is just a nod to the fact that the private sector needs to earn a return on investment, and when you have environmental issues, conditions with your structures that are a condition of structure that is less than ideal, and then a complicated deal to transact, the potential for ROI conflicts with those conditions. So looking at environmental issues associated with the property, you all remember the $360,000 abatement and remediation estimate that was developed about a year ago now. primary cost in that $360,000 was lead and asbestos abatement in the buildings should they remain. And also within that cost estimate, there were soil, gas, vapor mitigations that would be required. That's if we were to go with a redevelopment, meaning a applicant were to come forward and go to DEQ and say, you know, we didn't make the mess, but we're going to work to make it safe again for a redevelopment use, which would be very different than, say, if a party was responsible for the mess, you'd have to enter into what's called a voluntary cleanup program, and that's a whole different premise, whole different paradigm to work through. So that cost estimate came from the anticipation of a Brownsfield agreement. Then there's also in the environmental issues category, there's going to be a lot of reporting, process, permitting required to do anything on the property because of the environmental contamination issues that are known. And then this last bullet is just a point I wanted to include, which is to say, I don't think we necessarily know the full extent of the environmental considerations that we have on this property. You know, as negotiations begin with DEQ, if there were to be a redevelopment party in the mix, you would have to go to DEQ and begin negotiations on what it would take to make this site safe again. And there's other things that could come up that we haven't explored in depth. For instance, groundwater issues, or you name it. There's a lot to consider. And while we know we have some issues there, I don't think we necessarily know that we know the full extent of them. We could, but I think there's a real risk that we don't, and I just want to bring that to everybody's attention. So on to the condition of the structure. I just have a couple pictures here. As you can see, the roof is falling apart. That's a rubber membrane that you see on the left-hand side of the picture here. You have the roof's edge there completely deteriorating. It's obviously pretty difficult to take pictures over top of the roof, but there's a number of penetrations that now exist in both buildings, so when it rains, you have water entering the building here on the north side of the property as well as on the south side. This is just some of the stuff that's fallen off the roof and is collecting on the property. It's becoming an issue with blowing into the adjacent properties as the building deteriorates. I think we really need to take a hard look at what to do with these buildings. Repurpose them has been a part of the conversation for a while, but they're becoming less and less structurally sound, and there's more and more falling off the building every day. So on to the legal constraints side. Remember that if we are to pursue a public purpose and a public benefit with this building, the type of public benefit is very, and the way in which we can execute our ability to participate in providing some kind of compensation for that benefit is very prescriptive in the general statute, as our city attorney will no doubt tell you. And during our last RFP process, a lot of this came to light. We had an affordable housing component, then there was a workforce development component, and just the ways in which you can participate in those deals, depending on what the public benefit is, are very different. So this is just a quick table to lay out the considerations that are involved with that. For instance, if you're looking at affordable housing, you have to, of course, serve low-income people, low-income citizens, but you have a 15-year window, which you have to provide that subsidy of affordability. But if you're doing a public purpose that is non-housing, you have a whole different set of considerations, namely subsequent sale is not permitted. So as soon as that property ceases to be used for that public benefit, there's a clawback provision that we as a local unit would have to bring that property back under city ownership, which makes, again, back to the private sector compatibility portion, it makes it hard for folks to finance a deal. Statutes like that if they were to pursue a public benefit that is non-housing. So yeah, again, general statutes could really hinder the way that a developer would obtain financing for a project like this. The environmental mitigation costs, I think, are probably more than the property is worth at the end of the day, and I think most developers looking at the property will come to that same conclusion, that especially when they look at the time factor and the risk factor associated with the environmental issues. There's a lot to worry about there if you're a developer. You really have to navigate it through the brownfield agreement, and there could be a lot to it. It could be smooth sailing, but it's a negotiation, and there's a lot to figure out along the way. So these next set of slides are just to set you all up with a little bit of background about the area that the property exists in. I thought it'd be beneficial to go through some census statistics just to sort of paint a picture as to what public benefits council might consider here, should that be the route that we choose to go with another redevelopment. So first up, if you look at the census data, it'll show you that 60% of the folks living in the census tract that I just highlighted on the last map are paying more than 50% of their income toward housing, which is obviously very, very burdensome on a household's finances. Then you have another 20% paying 30 to 50%. Usually the rule of thumb is you want to be 30% or below on your housing costs, and we just have 20% of the population in this area at that level according to the census data. On the topic of affordable housing, I just did a quick bit of research on what the low-income housing tax credits look like in the zip code. That's the easiest way to summarize this data is by zip code, so it goes a little bit broader than the census tract I just showed you. But just in the 28401 zip code, you have almost 1,000 units receiving annually an amount of $5.4 million in housing subsidies in this area. That breaks down to about $5,500 per house per year, or per unit per year. Excuse me. So there's a good bit of housing work, affordable housing work already taking place in this area through low-income housing tax credits. Another relevant statistic here, I think, are the vacancy rates in units. The county average for vacancy rate, again, according to the census data, is about 4%, but in the project area that we're talking about here, the census tract, they estimate it to be 17%. So there's, according to the census data, a much higher proportion of vacant units in the area relative to the county. Also, relative to the rest of the county, rents in the census tract skew relatively lower. That's what this graphic here is demonstrating. So going on the high side, you have 62% of the county paying more than $1,000 per rental unit, but in the project area, we're at just 47%, and then you can see those other groups of rent levels are proportionally higher, hence rents are skewing relatively lower in this area versus New Hanover County. And again, on the topic of affordable housing, because it did take center stage as the key public benefit last time that we considered for the RFP, household incomes in this area skew significantly lower relative to the county averages. You have over 70% of households making under $35,000 a year. So if we're thinking about affordability, again, I would just make the point that affordability is relative to what your income is, and the incomes in this section of our community skew significantly lower than the rest of the county.
Hey, Aubrey.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned 28401, right?
Yes.
Well, I need you to expound or tell us what 28401 covers, so people can get a really good understanding, and not just think Castle Street, but when you're talking about that entire area.
Yes, sir.
If information available.
It'd be hard for me to describe verbally. I don't have the zip code map too well defined in my head, but to your point, it is significantly bigger than just the census tract that I showed in this map here. It covers a lot more territory. So it is, Councilman Spears, it was just the most granular way I could summarize the low-income housing tax credit data. But your point is a fair one. It covers a lot more territory than just this area.
Thanks. And I was just asking that, so when you talk about the significant difference in incomes. I just wanted to give that
Yes.
wide open of what you were talking about.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just a couple more stats. I think this slide wraps them up, but just under half of the residents within the census tract are renters under 65 years old, which I kind of thought of as working age. And of those half, 44% of that 47% are residents who are under the age of 65 who rent and lack access to a vehicle. So their household does not have a vehicle available to them, and they, generally speaking, according to the census data, lack access to a vehicle. So overall in that census tract, we're talking about just north of 20% of the residents are those who are renters under 65 and lack access to a vehicle. Okay, on to recommendations as council considers next steps on how to proceed with this project and direct staff. My recommendations would be to first and foremost reduce complexity anywhere we can. This project has a lot of different layers of issues, and as you layer them all on top of each other, they become very, very difficult to navigate, as is evidenced by our current state of affairs on the property. The other 2 points, 2 and 3 here, go back to what I mentioned at the top of the presentation, which are, I think if we want to go the RFP route, if council is considering the RFP route, I think we need to raise our expectation on what our level of investment needs to be, and probably at the same time lower the expectation on what we're going to be able to achieve in terms of scale of public benefit, whatever category that might fall in. 4A and 4B here, I would just point out that we could, of course, always consider the property, putting it up for sale via an upset bid process, sealed bid process, or public auction, I believe, are the 3 methods in which we can put the property up for sale. But if another partnership, whether it be a public-private partnership or a public-public partnership, were to be pursued, I would recommend that we kind of take the broker's approach to that and see what offers are out there, any and all offers, whether they be from public or private entities, and consider all those at the same time through an RFP. If we were to do another RFP, I would make it a lot more detailed in terms of what our abilities are in terms of completing a transaction. So I would lay out the legal constraints, I would lay out the environmental issues, I would have any developer looking at this RFP coming into it eyes wide open, whether they be private or public sector. So with that, I'll end it with questions and guidance.
We'll start with Mr. Rivenbark first, and we'll go to my right, then Mr. Barnett, Mr. White.
You know, we're kind of like a rat that's caught in a trap. We don't want the cheese. We just want to get out of the trap. And nobody can ever say that this council and the one before this council hasn't done everything in our power to not dispose of the property, but to help create a better environment along that part of Castle Street. Nobody can. I mean, this thing goes back years. So there's, to me, I don't know how much money we've got into it from hard dollars plus our staff and the angst that it's caused, but I would just like, as quickly as possible, to prepare this property for sale and let the next person come along private side. He's going to have to meet our zoning ordinance. He's going to have public input from the neighbors. Let somebody else do it. I want to wash my hands of this. We've tried every way in the world, and it's just not working. It's insanity to keep thinking that we're going to go on down that same path, spend more money, and then end up here 2 years from now with the same presentation. Thank you.
Mr. Barnett?
Thanks. Go back to the slide just before this one with the 47%, because I think you made the statement that you said like 80% of the folks, you said only 20% of the people have transportation, right?
No, sir. It was 20% lack access to a vehicle, just around there, 20 to 25, somewhere in there.
Because, well, and you get that figure from totaling these two numbers?
Yeah, so if I were to look at the total population in the census tract, 47% of the residents are renters who are under 65 years old. So that's half of the total population. And then the and in between these two statistics is to mean of that roughly half of the population, there's 44% of that half are residents who also lack access to a vehicle, are under 65, and are renters.
So that's where you got the 20%.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Sorry, I didn't quite know how to lay this one out. I know that was potentially confusing.
Okay. And then the last, you made the statement that you want the buyer to be aware of all of the stuff that's on the property. We said that before, though, right? That's not like something new that we're telling people.
I think we learned an awful lot about the property through our last RFP process. We became a lot more knowledgeable on the extent of the environmental considerations that were there. We also became much more aware of the various legal constraints or legal ways that we'd have to transact this on this property as it relates to redevelopment. So as you recall from the last RFP, because of the environmental issues that were discovered, the then applicant or the then successful applicant to the RFP was looking at doing commercial use on one half of the property and residential use on the other half because of the environmental issues. And it's one parcel, so he wanted to have affordable housing and workforce development. So working that deal with those general statutes to line up with the environmental issues ended up requiring that we would have to subdivide the property. But if we were going to subdivide and sell the property on the northern end, we would have had to have put in a clawback provision to be able to take the property back should that public benefit for workforce development cease to exist, which made it difficult to finance.
And then I guess my last question, looking at those photos that you showed with all that debris and stuff, are we not responsible for at least like removing that, tidying it up, making it look, because it's really an eyesore.
Yes, sir, it is. And I know I drive by the property as often as I can, and I believe our Parks and Recs crews are out there from time to time treating the weeds, and I've noticed that they've also been cleaning up the debris and putting it on the property. But absent a more intentional action item on the building, I think that's what's been happening. But we can certainly do more there. I think
Councilman Barnett, let me
ask city
let me
manager
take Aubrey off this hook. We need to make a decision about what we're going to do with this property.
Right.
And frankly, if we're going to try to preserve those buildings, then we need to go in and remove the hazardous material that's in those buildings. There's asbestos in the floors, there's asbestos in the pipe wrapping, there's asbestos in the roofing material. Right. If we're not going to try to save those buildings, then we can go in and take all of that down and get rid of it at one time. The problem is we're caught, as my father used to say, betwixt and between, and not knowing which way we're supposed to go. And so we need to make a decision as to whether or not we want to preserve those buildings for sale, and if we do, then we need to spend the money on getting the asbestos out of there.
So I'll just make one other point there, that if we go the route of preserving the building as much as possible, it'll just leave the brick walls and the steel trusses, because the roof will likely have to be taken down.
Yeah. All right. Thanks.
There's roughly $360,000 in various, first of all, Mr. Parsley, thank you for this presentation. It was really helpful for me. $360,000 in various environmental mitigation costs. That's our rough estimate.
It's estimate from a year ago, and I would call it a rough estimate, yes.
Would the city incur those costs if we were to not demo the buildings, but get the asbestos all out there? I mean, would we incur pretty much that whole $360,000?
Not the whole cost.
Good chunk.
It would be a good chunk of it, though. And I think it would also depend on, again, are we taking the buildings down or are we preserving them? Because keeping them there would raise our abatement and costs versus a demolition would be a
complete demo.
whole different, exactly, it'd be a whole different set of activities that would be less costly.
Okay. Have we obtained an appraisal or a BPO on the property to see what the value is, the total value of the property?
The last appraisal, we had two appraisals that are relatively recent. One was $390,000, and then we got the estimate for environmental remediation, and then we got another appraisal which took into account the costs associated with doing the environmental remediation work, and that lowered the appraisal to $230,000.
With the remediation work, so
Yeah,
we didn't do.
with the environmental issues taken into account.
Okay, so if we put it on the open market today, without doing much to it, we can get 230 for it. That's what the broker
appraisal,
price opinion of the appraisal, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right, great. I hadn't been working on this as long as all of you have, but I would echo Councilman Reibenbarg's sentiments. It appears that we're like absolutely operating in the red on this property, no matter what we continue to do, throwing good money after bad. So we've exhausted a lot of possibilities trying to do what we can, but I think we need to get out of the way and allow the free market to figure out what's best for that property, and taxpayer money that's been, pushed into it. But so I would just echo Councilman Reibenbarg's sentiments on that. But thank you again for the presentation.
Aubrey, I'm on board with Charlie. I think I voted to sell it last time, but I'm not. I mean, I was always for trying to make it work, and we have done what we can in terms of we just couldn't find the right partner. But I think what I'm hearing you say is it wouldn't really matter who the partner is. It's the size of the site. It's all the little pieces. It's almost. I thought it might be the partner, but I don't really know that it is after seeing it. It's more, you can't have handcuffs on this one. It feels like you've got to just let it, here's the price, negotiate it, and let, as Luke referred to it, the private sector, let people that do this figure it out. And to Charlie's point, if somebody wants high density, they're going to have to do some, affordable. So, I mean, it's all built into it now, whereas maybe it wasn't before. And that's probably what it's going to take, high density, to make this work because of all the cleanup. So, and unfortunately, I don't know. I mean, they would have been cool to keep those buildings just because the old brick but at the same time, the way they align, the piece of how much land they take up, it messes the deal up, it looks like to me. And we've let them go. It's gone so long that I'm not sure, like what'd you say, the trust in the brick walls. So is it the kind, I'm for selling it and have been for a while now. I don't remember when we last thought about that, but is it really more of a deal? I mean, Luke was trying to get to a number, but it sounds like more of a deal where we sell it and then they come back with the cost of repair and it's just kind of a zero. I mean, or pretty close to it, right? That's what we're dealing with, right? They say, okay, yeah, we'll pay that, and they come back and say, well, let me do my diligence, and here's all this cleanup. So really, that's about where it is.
I think the private sector will determine the value depending on how we go about. If we were to put the property up for sale, I'd be curious to see where that number landed, because there's a lot to consider here, and I think it really comes down to what your appetite, if you're a private developer, what your appetite for risk is.
Well, thank you.
Oh, go ahead, Margaret.
Thanks. That was very informative. I will say that zip code 28401 includes all of downtown and all of the new apartments and River Place and a lot of other places, so it's hard to compare that. So I think the census tract is certainly more telling, so thank you for that. I, along with several others up here, have been really trying to make this work for well over a decade. I don't know now, it's at least 12, 13 years, maybe 15 years. And I was a big proponent, in opposition to some other people, but I was a big proponent of trying to have a public-private partnership and come up with some sort of community benefit, a public benefit. And that was really important to me. And I just feel like we've made every effort there. I mean, 15 years ago, we were working with, what was it called, the South Side Group? I mean, we've worked with different groups along the way and tried to make every effort. And I think it's a shame that the buildings have continued to deteriorate. I don't know that we would allow, I mean, we make other neighbors take care of things. And we have let this deteriorate, and I understand that. I'm not placing blame. It's just time passes, and that's what's happened. I do think that at this point, and I am doing a complete 180. I think at this point we ought to list it for sale as is, take it, and we ought to, if we can get some money out of that, we ought to take that money and invest it in Eden Village, a place, and get some homeless people off the street and a community that has some wraparound services, and do something really good with that money. And Neil may very well be right that any person that could invest in that will have to do some affordable housing to get some density there to make the whole thing pencil out. So I'm just going to completely backtrack and say that at this point I think we need to just list it for sale and see what happens.
One more comment. Would it be possible for either Ron or Brian to come up? I'd like to ask a question about redevelopment. It's a redevelopment question, and you may know. I'll ask you.
It depends on the question.
In a lot of instances, I've seen people where they go in and take a derelict building down and leave the pad or one wall, and I'm sure those planners out there are probably laughing at me, but it does allow them, it gives them some break on setbacks, an existing code versus what it was. Is that, I see Brian looks like he's chewing.
Yeah, that's too specific for my knowledge.
And the only reason I'm asking that, I want to get rid of this property, you know, but count our losses and run, stop the bleeding, get it gone. But in order to help the next buyer, would that be something that would be, does it make any sense at all, Brian?
In this situation, it's zone UMX, so there are no setbacks.
Okay.
There wouldn't, it would be a 100% build. There's no parking requirement. They could do a full site build out and rely on on-street parking if they wanted to.
But what I said, just so I don't look that stupid.
Absolutely. In other situations, that is absolutely true.
Okay. Thank you, sir. It's you know, the city is still going to be on the hook because they're not going to, nobody's going to relieve us of any liability down the road for contamination. We're in this. So like I'm saying, let's cut our losses, prepare it for sale, move it out, let somebody else come along, and then if they have to come back to us and, you know, with their pants pockets hanging out, maybe we can get back in, just very small. But we should have sold this thing 10 or 15 years ago, and instead of letting it sit and fall into this repair. Thank you.
I think you do have a consensus, and we have been working on this, and there has been a lot of time and effort that has gone into it, not only from the city, but also from nonprofits and people that have come together. This is a very complicated, as you alluded to, property. But I do want to mention to the city council, and do want to ask this of the city attorney, everything that we've seen that has been redeveloped downtown on the riverfront has had a Brownsville agreement.
That's correct, Mr.
And
Mayor.
everybody that has bought a piece of property down there has understood that those properties down there along the riverfront, maybe even off the riverfront, are contaminated, but they buy them at full price value. What I want to caution council on is this whole notion that just because it is contaminated and it's a Brownsville agreement, whoever buys it is going to get a Brownsville agreement that's going to reduce their tax implications, correct?
I think that would be a critical piece for any developer, Mr. Mayor, and because the statute mandates us to use certain methods, it's going to have to be, to comply with law, either a public auction or an upset bid. I think with market conditions right now, it may be that this is the absolute best time to get it out there. I would recommend to do it expeditiously.
Because to give Clark Kipp and his group credit for at least negotiating and working hard with the clawback provisions and trying to make certain that they could produce enough of the private sector income to make this worthwhile, including trying to put in affordable housing. One of the aspects of this whole thing was we just give them the property, and the city still be involved in the cleanup, and the city would still invest in the project in some capacity through our CDBG funding, which basically we were building the project out, and that's why we all walked away. I think here we have a nice piece of property in a growing part of the community. You take that money, you sell it for full face value, and I know they'll come in here and try to negotiate with us, but I've seen it all over this community where people are selling property with contamination on it, getting a Brownsville agreement and reducing their tax structure over a 5-year period. So we want to get the highest and full use and value for this property for the taxpayers of this community, and then use that money and put it back into affordable housing programs that we are using as fast as we get the money. That's my position on this. We have tried, we have worked, and those buildings should come down. They've got asbestos in them, they got poison, and if you get in there and you start preserving those, then you're pretty much in it. Let the private sector make that determination first and foremost, because they'll be able to do it. And then we take that money and put it back into affordable housing programs in the community or in that particular area to help folks with rental assistance, rental rehab, or HOP programs. That's my position.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
hold on. I agree with you to a certain extent about let's bulldoze the property if need be. I mean, if it's hazardous to the community, let's bulldoze it. Let's clear the lot off and put it up for sale. I don't understand the rush. I've heard our fellow council members say that, it's costing us, but it's only costing us because we keep trying to do projects and partner with other people for this property. But if we just bulldoze the lot and put it up for sale, or if we leave it, Tony, what is it costing us just to maintain ownership of this property?
It will not cost us anything in the short run to maintain the property, especially if we go ahead and destroy the buildings that are on there. I do want to go back and Councilman Rivenbark asked a minute ago about redevelopment, and I want to make sure that I'm right about this, and I want to make sure, so I'm going to ask Brian to come forward. My recollection is that if we tear the walls down but leave the pads and the impervious surface on that property, that will be a benefit to the developer. But Brian, you need to verify an old man's memory.
Well, either way, I think we have to do that because of the soil contamination. So we can't break up the slab or the impervious surface there, but.
That is a good thing, because if you remove it, technically it would be considered new impervious, so it might make it more expensive to redevelopment, because you can no longer count that pervious against the new stormwater rules.
But back to Councilman Spears' question, Councilman Spears, I would believe that if we did go ahead and clear the buildings and clear the lot, and if it just sat there, my only concern is I just want to get this property back in use in the community. It's been an eyesore and a problem for us now for quite some time.
I understand that, but I mean, it seems like we're in a rush to do nothing because we can't get anything done, and I'm sure the property will sell, and then we'll have to deal with what comes there, and all the issues that come along with something like that. But if we just clear it for the time being, I don't think we have to be in such a rush to sell it or to make something happen there. If we do sell it, like the mayor said and others suggested, let's put it into another project, funding affordable housing throughout the city. Let's do that, but I don't think we have to rush to get it done now. That's just my opinion on it.
To the mayor's point, we and also the city attorney's point, we would be listing the property for sale at possibly its highest value in history and the greatest real estate market we've ever seen. But also, we've got a tremendous amount of due diligence that we've that we've acquired over the, from the past RFP and all the things you've kind of dove into over the last year, we would absolutely, and that's expensive to a potential developer who would be, utilizing that. So we can provide all of that to the general public once we do put this out on the open market, correct?
Yes.
I will say, I will echo what Mr. Waddell has said. I don't think there's a rush to get rid of it, seeing as how we've had it for 15 years. But I do believe that if we move forward in trying to sell it, that now is an opportune time to get a return for the taxpayers that can be reinvested. And so, that's real estate, is you want to sell high. So now's the perfect opportunity to do that. So I would be for going ahead with that.
Hey, John, will we go through this process in respect to divesting this piece of property? There is a bid process, there's an upset bid process. So there is, if I bid on the property, then there's a potential that another upset bid can come within how many days? 5 days?
I think it's 10.
I believe it's 10. And, Mr. Mayor, the statute lays out about 3 ways that we can do that.
Please
You
tell
could
me.
just have a public auction, but upset bid normally, and I'll defer to the manager on this, but normally upset bid gets you the absolute highest amount. It takes longer because you hit that 9th day, you think you've got a sale, and somebody is willing to pay you more, and they put in another upset bid. If that's council's pleasure, it will probably take a reasonable amount of time and most likely get you the maximum amount for the property.
Okay, and then my other question is this, in respect to or in regards to the environmental portion of this thing. Tony, I know that when we acquired the property from Wave Transit at the time, there was, at that time, a Phase 1 evaluation done.
Yes, sir.
Then once it was under contract, there seemed to be a Phase 2 environmental
Yes, sir.
assessment. Has there been an additional assessment of any sort since that Phase 2 has been done?
No, sir.
So does the Phase 2 include the remediation process?
So there's been 2 limited scope Phase 2 evaluations, one for each side of the property, first the eastern half and then the western half. And I'm sorry, Mayor, the question was about the remediation estimate?
Yeah, in the Phase 2 remediation, was a remediation document that was filed with that?
Yeah, so one of the other things we paid for was a cost estimate for what the anticipated remediation costs would be for another party taking it through the Brownsfield Agreement Program. And it came with a lot of caveats and assumptions, and it's a year old now. But that we did pay for one of those, and that was a $360,000 estimate that I referred to earlier.
So that's about what the remediation cost would be, about $360,000.
That was the estimate a year ago, yes, sir.
At that document, okay. So when this property is put up for sale, all of that is public knowledge?
Yes,
All
sir.
of it is part of the
Yes, sir.
process? So whoever
Yes, sir.
goes into this understands what the impacts are and what it's going to take to fix it and clean it up, correct?
We know about as much about this property as we can. There are probably still some limited.
And I would imagine that whoever were to buy it, going through their banking process, they're going to require
Yes,
their
sir.
own Phase 1 or Phase 2 environmental.
Absolutely.
So the process of divesting this piece of property is not going to be done in a month or
No, sir.
6 months or a year, possibly up to about a year is what I'm looking at. Because we've all, for us that have been in the real estate business, have all had to deal with this stuff, and it doesn't come across easy. A savvy developer that understands Brownsfields will understand it and say, I can take care of the risk and I'm going to go forward with it. I think you'll find more of those than you will those that want you to participate in it. I don't think the city should be participating, because if the city's participating in it, it's going to own it. And we've seen that over and over and over again on every one of these when we divest ourselves of Brownsfields sometimes. So, but I do feel that this is a valuable piece of property. Me and Charlie were just talking about it up here, just off the record. It could be up to $1 million. But I want to use that $1 million, to Kevin's point and to others that have a concern about the concern was we would try to put affordable housing in this, to use that $1 million or whatever money we received, just like we did with the fields up here at, on Front Street, where we put it back into Eden Village. I want to make sure that that money is put back into affordable housing programs in the city.
We certainly can do that. I do want to back up a step to conversation that we were talking about divesting ourselves of it. And Aubrey has already touched on this. There are three methods by which we can divest ourselves of the property. One is a sealed bid, one is an upset bid, and one is an auction. And Aubrey has some information, I think, about, he's had some discussions with some folks who have balked at the idea of the upset bid process.
Yes, sir. I've had discussions with several developers in town who still have an interest in the property and have approached me to ask about status. And in a couple of those discussions, the topic came up that, you know, I relayed to some of these developers that depending on what public benefit they would pursue under an RFP, it would make things a good bit easier if they were to pay fair market value for the property. And I had one say, okay, well, we would do that. And I said, okay, well, you know what other option you have is you could initiate the upset bid process. And this particular developer said that that process, it was their opinion that process invited some of the less savvy folks to just outbid folks by, you know, more savvy developers who are actually going to implement what they say they're going to implement by $1,000 and then, you know, balk at the end and create a mess down the road was one opinion I received, and that's what Tony's referring to. But I'm sure council has opinions on.
Well, with the upset bid, it's not, you can't just come in and raise it $500. I think it's 5%. And you have 10 days to do that. I thought it was 5, but 10 days. But these people have to be qualified. You just can't take somebody off the street and say, I'll pay you X number of dollars. They have to be pre-qualified, and they have to, 5% is considerable. And I've worked on half a dozen, and it's not like it gets into a bidding war. People that are doing it on an upset bid, they know where they can go, and that's it. Sealed bid is okay. If you open the sealed bids up and it's not where you want it to be, you just put them in the trash can and move on to the next time. Whoever gets this, they need to be given a considerable due diligence period, and we can work with them, but we don't want, I mean, we're not going to be Big Brother where we're there with the pocketbook or whatever. It needs to be an arm's length transaction, and they take it and move with it. But I don't have I think the bid process or the upset bid is I mean, that's just from where I sit. I think that's the way to go. We're not looking to knock a home run here, but we want to get the fair market value out of it. And I think those people that come along and say, well, I'm going to do something for the public benefit, well, do it. You know, the private side, you know, it's like I always rail on about developers are expected to go out and build everything for nothing, you know, and make a profit. And in our land development code that we just did, there's some flexibility in there, and there needs to be flexibility in this. You know, give them the break where they need it, but we don't need to be involved in that. We need to sell it and sell it quick, or get that process started quick.
Aubrey, the word you used, though, in there, I thought I heard you say in an RFP, right? You said, in other words, that conversation you had implied that there would be a checklist of potential things that we might want or not want, right?
That was the premise of the discussion.
Well, we're talking about just you do whatever you do whatever's within our code.
Right, yes, sir. But the point I was trying to make was that the developer said, oh, I would pay fair market value for the property. And I said, okay, well, you don't even need to go through an RFP then. If you're that confident, you can, you know, that your price is a good one and nobody else would be able to do what you're going to do, you can initiate the upset bid process by submitting a bid. I'd write up the resolution and bring it before council to initiate the upset bid process, and I believe that's how it works. Did you all vote to initiate that process with that bid in hand? You could.
I don't think the bid comes to us until the final bid's been made. I mean, if you brought every bid that came to us before it could be possibly upset, that's kind of cumbersome.
Just to initiate the process, I don't know if you need a bid or not to initiate the process, but I've seen resolutions that read that, oh, we received a bid, So we're going to go out for an upset bid. Can anybody do better than this one? But I don't know if it's required.
The statute authorizes us to receive or solicit or negotiate an initial offer. That person pays 5% into the clerk, and then council puts out the notice. Staff obviously would do so. We put out the notice, and then the next bidder would have to raise it by 5%. You are absolutely correct, Councilmember Rivenbark. And if somebody does so, then that's the standing bid, and the process repeats itself until the 10 days pass and no one has raised the bid.
All right, go ahead.
You first.
Me? I think we ought to, we've done that in the past on other things, but I think maybe this time we ought to consider the sealed bid. That's just like in real estate, you're just telling people, bring us your highest and best. Do you want the property? If you do, tell us, what you're willing to pay for it. And it's sort of a secretive, competitive thing. And as Charlie said, I think that is true, that if none of them meet your baseline, you just throw them away and say it didn't work and start over, and you've got these other options.
Got Luke over here. Luke, and then Councilman Barnett.
This is really just for my education. It's my first bidding process. So on the upset bid, is it just the 5% dollar amount that is taken into consideration, or do they have to meet the rest of the terms, financing, due diligence, closing period, all of that? Or is it just the dollar amount that they have to exceed, but their other terms can be?
I would imagine that we would go through a pre-qualification process before we actually allowed anybody to bid on the property, just so we would hopefully inhibit bogus bid type of things.
I understand that. My question is, let's say we get a bid for $1 million, and we get a bid for 5%, $1 million cash closing in 30 days, all right? And then we get an upset bid that's 1.5 closing in 2 years, and they're putting the minimal amount down, so it's really maybe it's a higher number, and it upsets the bid, but it's really not a great offer.
We set the terms, and as long as they meet those terms, then it's just the number that changes.
Understood. Thank you.
All right, I was kind of asking what Luke was asking, because I was kind of getting confused with like the private bid, sealed bid and all. I just want to, I think the mayor said it earlier, that we want to get the best deal for the project, for the land. And then I definitely agree with you on using it to help affordable housing later on in the city, throughout the city. But I'm in favor of it.
John, on the sealed bid, let's just say we have 5 bids, and we open the bids up, we take the best bid, or we as a council can say, we don't want any of these bids. None of these bids meet our criteria. Is that correct?
That is correct. The notice should indicate that, and you could set a minimum and just tell folks up front that you're not taking less than X amount.
Gotcha. All right. So, this is the fear that I've had on this piece of property. It seems like there's always a lot of people looking around to see what the other guy's going to do, and the upset bid comes forward at the last moment. And by law, if it's above that particular threshold, we have to take it, and then we start the whole process over again. Is that correct?
Essentially, you would need to accept it if they fulfill all the terms, the qualifications, and they have upped it to 5%, then my advice to council would be you need to accept that bid.
So the way I look at it is a group of people could come together, and you could have the wherewithal to do it financially with an LLC and say, I'm going to put an upset bid period in there, just to upset the whole apple cart again. That's been my concern about this. And my thinking is, if anybody that's looking at this or thinking about redeveloping this understands 2 things. It's got contamination on it, which we've got a pretty thorough evaluation of the site, and you got zoning, and you're going to come down here and you're going to talk to the city officials about what you can and you can't build on that piece of property. A lot of your due diligence has already been done on this property. I don't mind giving them a due diligence period of 90 days, whatever they want to look at, but I wouldn't make it too far out too, because this comes down to every day that goes by, that interest rate could be going up. And anybody that's developing property is always looking at the cost of borrowing money. The cost of borrowing money is dramatically increasing. We're probably going to have another significant rate hike this year. So from my perspective is I like the sealed bid process. That's just me personally. Going forward, give us your best shot. You know what you got here. This is all the evaluations we've had. I think we ought to have an update to make certain that that 369 or what number you looked at, we can update that number so we can have it in our hands so whoever gets it can go move forward with it. And then whoever gives us the best bid, we take it and put that money in affordable housing. And if we don't like any of the bids, we can toss them back into the trash and start all over again. That's my opinion.
I'm in agreement. Typically, I think in a different real estate market, the upset bid, would be a good way to go. But right now, that sealed bid gives us all the leverage, right? Why wouldn't we do that?
Gives us a lot bit more. And it gives us all, it gives the council a lot more ability to evaluate it on their own instead of having to worry about an upset. And if we don't like what we say, we can put it right back out. But this process is going to take some time. So it's not going to be overnight. And I didn't even think about that, about leaving, even if you take down the building, leaving the building pads there so you don't have to hurt the impervious surface content of the project. So it's my take on it. Okay. Okay.
I think we've been provided direction. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Aubrey.
Mr. Mayor, we have a need for a closed session.
Okay,
And the closed session will occur downstairs in the city manager's conference room.
Okay, and everybody, I'm going to have to take a roll call, so I'm going to make it, I'm going to make the motion to enter into a closed session pursuant to the provisions of General Statute 143-31811A and 3 in order for the city council to, 1, consult with the city attorney regarding potential legal claims, including the case of Schroeder versus the City of Wilmington, file number 2022 NCCOA-210. And then I will also note for Madam Clerk that the closed session will be held in the city manager's conference room. At the end of the closed session, council will reopen its public session and adjourn from that location without returning to the council chamber. I will now take a roll call. We have a motion by Councilmember Ravenbark. Second. Second by Councilmember Barnett. Discussion, okay. How do you vote, Mayor Pro Tem? Aye. How do you vote, Councilmember Ravenbark? Aye. How do you vote, Councilmember Anderson? Aye. How do you vote, Councilmember Barnett?
Aye.
How do you vote, Councilmember Spears?
Aye.
Okay, how do you vote, Councilmember Waddell? Aye. And the chair is aye. At this time, we will now go into closed session.